Hello and welcome back to another lighting diagram. Today we're talking about Jules Breton's The Song of the Lark. And this is a painting that I've had on my kind of little docket for these videos for a while now. And I'm pretty excited about talking about it because it's sort of different from a lot of the ones we do. It is outdoors. I haven't done that many outdoors ones, but also it has this kind of unique situation where the sun is really, really low and it is in frame. And so we know mostly where the lighting is coming from, but how do we then talk about getting exposure on the subject, even though the sun is in a specific position? And how do we make this something that we can capture with photographic mediums? Because just having the sun behind a person like this is probably not going to work out super well. But kind of the story that is going on here is that there's a young lady who's a field worker and she has stopped to listen to the song of the lark. It kind of has these feelings of melancholy. There's probably a little bit of sadness overall, but also wonderment with the nature around her, all these kinds of feelings all being brought in. So what I would like to do when trying to translate this to a photographic medium is make sure that we capture some softness. We're also making sure that we have clarity for her expression. And we are trying to get this kind of like temporal location of having the sun being so low in the sky. If you've watched any of these videos before, you probably know already that I have a Patreon where you can get this free Filmmaker Tools template right here at the top. That's completely free. It's for Draw.io, which is a free and open source diagramming software. And while you're there, you could potentially join my Patreon. Tiers start at just $2. They help support these videos as well as my overall cinematography videos. If you want to get started with Draw.io for making your own lighting diagrams, I have a video that talks about how to get started and to use the basics of this piece of software that's linked down in the video's description. So with that all out of the way, let's get started with diagramming this image. Now, we don't really have set walls or anything like that for this because, it's outdoors. You could technically actually have a background. If you're going to do this in a more like, for lack of better terms, antiquated style, you could have a painted backdrop with the sun like this and then lighting that uses that sun to motivate it. That would look pretty cool. And I might do that sometime as a diagram, just come back to this one and do that. That would be kind of fun. But for this, I want to talk about just the simply using the sun and trying to get this kind of look on the cheap while also being effective. Because the big deal here that, I've kind of pointed out already is that we need to balance the exposure of the sun, the sky, and of Our Lady, who is our subject. So some things I want to discuss here that I think are also differences between a painted medium and a photographic medium in terms of the manipulation that we can do is that we are getting an edge light from the sun on her arm right there. While at the same time, we're not really getting any edge light from the sun on the side of her face that's furthest away from us. And at the same time, on her chest, we not only have a shadow right here under her chin as if the light's almost coming from a top-down angle this way, but we also have the part of her chest right here underneath her collarbone being illuminated enough for visibility, and the shadow isn't all that deep. Now, if this was a purely photographic medium and we weren't doing anything else with this, to get the exposure on the sun like this, she would be almost definitely entirely silhouetted. Film might bring you back a little bit of dynamic range, but honestly, this exposure and this look is highly related to this being painted because we can use that artist manipulation of the reality to make everything kind of balance out. And you know what, to the human eye, this actually might look more like this, although if you're kind of staring directly in the sun, it's still going to be bright no matter what. So we have to understand that there are limitations in the photographic aspect of this that we have to, kind of contend with. Similar idea is on her feet. We do also have a little bit more of an edge light, but really even like the shadows along her feet right here are pretty short. These would likely be a little bit longer because of the sun's position. This is kind of really abstracting how the light would be following on her. The sun isn't all that much of a motivation for the light and how we are perceiving her directly in this image. And you can really tell that because of the shadows on the feet. They're not extending out at all. Now, at the same time, the sun is lower in the sky and is being blocked by these trees some, but I would still expect her to have more of a shadow than this. This is much more of like that sort of top down, afternoon sun shadow, but it's so soft as if it was more of a foggy morning, which is the setting. So we're kind of working with a couple different things here to make this image, and then we have to analyze that to make our recreation of this type of style. So the easiest way to start out here is to just take a person and have them here, and then we're going to have the sun behind them like this. Obviously, that's not to scale, I hope, otherwise she's in some deep trouble. And then we're going to take our camera and we're going to place our camera right about here. And she's not quite center framed, but close enough. Basically, we have just enough for the center of it to really be, you can see the little point right above the cursor right here. That's the center. Basically, her right shoulder and edge of her face are the middle point. And this is, kind of more normal to telephoto lens, especially with how much this background does look kind of close to her. Nothing's being distorted and pushed out really far away. So I'd say, we're kind of in the normal to telephoto range. Nothing too extreme on the telephoto. That would definitely have pushed this background into a look where it would be right on top of her. So, just kind of somewhere towards the normal view, which would make sense also because, like I say, oftentimes these are paintings. They're being done with a human eye most of the time. And that's going to be influencing both the field of view and the spatial compression. And so technically, this is all you would need for this scene, a camera and the sun. You would not get this kind of image out of it though, unless the sun was really dim, there was a lot of cloud cover, and you were having that cloud cover really expand the light all around. You wouldn't get anything kind of close to this. She would be much more of a silhouette than anything else. So then how do we play with the properties to get something that's more like this? Well, first off, if you are having trouble with getting exposure on her because she's being so underexposed, exposed for her, you will blow out the sky more. You will probably lose the sun, but you will still get her, and it will feel much more of like a bright day though. What I would say is the goal here is to get a little bit more light back on her rather than try to compete with the sun in particular. By getting more light back on here, when you balance exposure between what is on her and the sun, you're going to get something that's a lot closer. So how do we do that? Well, we use some bounce material. You kind of have a couple different options here. Because of how her face is still quite illuminated versus, the front of her and also the sky and the sun, I'm going to put the bounce on this side so that she's basically facing the bounce and we're bringing all that light back to her front. That could flatten her out just a little bit, but what my hope is that the combination of the sun creating these edge lights and the shadow that she's in, we're trying to just raise that shadow essentially. And so by bringing some light back to her in this way, then we're able to get the exposure that we need without compromising so much of the sun being blown out and the sky being blown out. Because part of why this image feels like morning is that the sky is still a little dark. You could do things like having a gradient filter that goes from, either just a kind of a neutral density or even a colored orange kind of neutral density, and then, splits halfway down, and you can slot that into the front of your matte box, or, there's other types of holders for those types of filters. And you could use that to make the sky darker while retaining your exposure on her. That's definitely a possibility here, and something that I would maybe use to actually make this work. But I would still say that you need to bring some light back to her. I'm using a bounce here so that it's not going to be particularly shiny. What I want here is a soft look that brings up the shadow that she is in. By facing away from the sun, everything here is a shadow. But I don't want it to completely flatten out. I still want some of these folds of the fabric and those kinds of things to be there. So we don't want this to be, nearly competing with the sun. We just want it to be enough. And like I mentioned before, we do have this kind of edge light on the side of her arm, but not on her face. And that is a manipulation of this scene by the artist. So we're going to just have those edge lights because I don't think we're going to be able to control the sun in a way where it's not on her face, but it's on her arm, and not have something in shot, at least without like a lot of visual effects that are just completely unnecessary. So we're going to plan for that. And we're going to understand that that edge light is going to just be around here and be part of that glow. I think that that is a beautiful part of a kind of sunset type scene, is having that orange glow fall upon your subject. Even on her chest here, you are getting a little bit of that. Now that we have our bounce placed, we're able to bring up the entire front of our subject here and hopefully bring up her face enough. And like I said before, there's more trickery here than what meets the eye because her neck right here is in shadow, but her chest and her collarbone area isn't, and the chest and collarbone area match pretty well her face. And even if you look between the right and left sides of her face, the right side, which is closer to the sun but still in the shadow, is darker than the left side by just a hair. And so that to me does say that bringing light from the front and probably left of the camera is going to be a good decision to try to bring up that overall exposure to where we need it to be to get the exposure. Obviously, depending on the camera you have, depending if you're shooting on film, there's lots of other factors where you could be getting extra dynamic range to actually help with this process as well. We're kind of just talking in generals and not specific, camera capture systems right now. I'd also like to point out that the lighting over everything else is really even. So I think that the sense that there is like a kind of fog or cloudy aspect to this. So this is 1884. This is post-industrial revolution. I mean, some of this literally could be smog from factories in the area. We're more rural, so it's probably not. It probably is more likely just a fog. Fogging outdoors is quite difficult and takes a lot of equipment and manpower, and it's not super easy, especially if you have a breeze at all, and especially in an open area like this. But that is something you could technically do to add a little bit more diffusion. But what I would say is probably using some lens diffusion would help a lot. If you had a Promist filter, like a Lee soft filter, a smoke filter, just really any kind of diffusion type filters. You can even have a DIY diffusion filter. Those would help you also change how that light is being brought into the camera. Usually it reduces the contrast between your highlights and your darks. So that would bring up her exposure just a little bit while crushing down just a little bit on the overexposure of the sun and the sky. And so pretty much to get something like this, to replicate this kind of style, you could do something like have diffusion on your lens, a gradient ND filter to darken the sky just a little bit, and a bounce, and get something that looks kind of like this. Now, if you don't have those kinds of diffusion filters, then you could just try to compete with the actual sun a little bit more. You could use a reflector instead of a bounce. That would change the look, and that probably would fill in these shadows a lot more, but it would be something that gets you much more exposure. You could tolerate more of an underexposure on the shadow side and have the person be a little bit more silhouetted. If you're familiar with the film Days of Heaven, there's lots of scenes that are quite similar to this. Early morning, orange skies, open fields, and oftentimes the people are a little bit underexposed and more silhouetted. And so that works quite well. The other note that I have from that idea is that a lot of those shots also have these edge lights because they're shooting opposite of the sun and having the person basically be in shadow and raising it up with fill when needed. It's a really gorgeous way to design your cinematography and use natural light and not have to have a huge lighting setup also. I'm sure on Days of Heaven they had much more lighting than just bounces, but I'm talking about the ideas of how to bring these things together in a way that is also more affordable for micro budget filmmakers. So that's kind of option one here. Option two is to differ a little bit more from what we have in terms of this actual reference, because I'm going to bring more light to her by bringing up that edge light, using the sun as motivation for it. So maybe having the bounce still, but we take a lamp, and to be clear, this might have to be a powerful lamp. Depending on exactly when you're filming, how bright it is, all this kind of stuff. You want something that has a decent amount of power, and I'm going to put a Fresnel on it to help with that power. And so we're going to put this just off to the side here, and we're going to use that in a way to create much more of those edge lights. But we're going to be using the sun as motivation there. It won't be exactly the right angle, but at the same time, even the shadow here is not exactly the right angle. So I don't really have too much of a worry about that, as long as you're not getting like too much of two shadows. Now, one way to avoid that is by using the barn doors to cut the bottom of the light so that it doesn't fall on the ground and cause that extra shadow. In particular, you have it just more aimed at the shoulder, the arm, and the side of the face. Put some orange gels on that to make it really orange to match the color of the sun. And you're going to have something that is a little bit more dynamic and just once again be bringing up that exposure. That light could even, if she's walking, peek over onto her other arm as maybe it swings forward as she walks. From the story of this painting, the idea is that she's been working in the field with her hand scythe and she's kind of standing up and pausing to listen. So maybe she's not walking, but maybe she starts crouched and we raise with her into the light. That's definitely possible also. And that would be then a way to add a little bit more light to our scene. And then we could actually have some more bounce on this side that's opposite of the Fresnel and just be kicking a little bit more of that back into this shadow side. This light might also help with making sure that we have enough of that shadow on the far left side, because the entirety of her is in shadow, but the place where we are kind of seeing the most is on the left side of her neck, underneath her arm on the left side, and behind her ankles, opposite of the sun. So this is really a way that you could do it as well. And it's not still all that expensive. You do need a light and a Fresnel that are, kind of powerful, battery operated because you're outside unless you're using a generator, but that's going to raise your costs a whole lot. And you need two bounces. Now the bounces for any of these could be a 5-in-1 reflector, and it has a white side and you're just bouncing that light off the white side. They could be 4x4 silks. They could be large beadboard. There's lots of different options you have here, but personally, I would go with pretty much the largest 5-in-1 bounce that you can get your hands on. I would also probably, and this is, abstracting the light and the scene just a little bit, raise it up so that it comes down at an angle onto her face and to her collarbone just a tiny bit. You will have to play with how the sun is. And this is definitely one of those things where you're using the sun. You have no control over the sun. So that means you're going to have to plan well, do the little fist trick. You got about 15 minutes per fist at the angle of the sun. So, plan to make sure that you can get the shot in the way that you need it to be and shoot it several times. Do it when it's a little bit higher up so that you have something that's a backup. And then when it gets really low in the sky, right on the horizon, it will be the dimmest. So then you can maybe even raise up your ISO a little bit, bring that bounce a little bit closer, and have a little bit more of a balanced image. But if you have an hour to shoot this one shot, you might want to shoot it over and over again so that you have some options, especially when you take it into the grade and you want to make sure it matches with other things. So kind of the last option I'm going to talk about here is definitely a little bit bigger. What you could do to replicate in particular the light falling on her face downwards would be to, instead of having a bounce here, we're going to actually replace it with a large sheet of diffusion, probably a 12 by, to really get it soft. And then we're going to raise that up above her on 2 stands, and we're going to have a light that passes through this, and this would have to be a bright light because in this case, you are competing with the sun at least a little bit. And just have a really soft source that brings up those shadows overall, and it gets that look of her looking up towards the sky just a little bit. I mean, the sky bounces light all the time, so you can reasonably make this look natural depending exactly on how much clouds you have in the sky. If you have a completely cloudless day, this is going to look less natural. But also, is naturalism the thing that we inherently strive for with filmmaking? I think that telling the story, getting the exposure technically, and working to design our images is more important than naturalism in particular. So I will also get rid of that bounce because this should be providing enough. We're going to have the edge light from the light here going and casting along her edge. And we're going to have the diffusion that lightens up this shadow just a little bit with really, really soft light. We're still going to get this shadow under her neck from a combination of the actual sunlight, as well as this light being kind of 45 degrees top down. But you want this light to be very, very dim. You want it to just softly bring up that shadow. Now, this one is my least favorite of all these options because you need 2 big like combo stands to manage this diffusion sheet. You need a 12 by, you need a big powerful lamp, you need a lamp and a Fresnel over here, and you have to time it with the sun, and that's a lot more setup. I actually would prefer most of the time this one. I actually probably prefer most of the time this option here, using that bounce, being really, really agile with it. And I would also like this one as well, depending if you can get it all timed correctly, because you have to get the Fresnel and the lamp set up in time. It really depends on your schedule. So this one's gonna be the most grip, time, labor, and equipment intensive one. And I'm not sure how much of a difference it would make versus even just something right here like this, especially when you factor in cost and, scheduling it. So we have 3 different options here. These all could work for making this kind of image, and they kind of show different budget and stylistic ways to work on something like this. If you liked this video, please give it a like. It helps me with the YouTube algorithm and reaching new viewers who also like these kinds of videos. Like I said at the beginning, if you want to get my free Filmmaker Tools template, it's available over on my Patreon. It's completely free. You don't have to join or anything like that. It just is publicly available. I want to help people out with trying to get more diagramming and pre-production and just practice seeing how the light falls in images. So the link is down in the video's description. If you want to join, that's great. I have a free membership as well as paid memberships. The paid memberships support these kinds of videos. The free memberships notify you when I post new videos like this one or my regular cinematography videos. If you want to get the kinds of tools that I've been talking about in this video, I have affiliate links down in the video's description. Those also help support the channel. If you like these kinds of videos, you can consider subscribing for lots more about lighting, cinematography, and video production from a micro budget perspective. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it, and I hope that you have an absolutely wonderful day. Take care of yourselves.